Welcome, Duke alumni and friends, to this session of the Duke Alumni Forever Learning Institute, an interdisciplinary educational program organized in a set of thematic courses. My name is Zach Fisher. I'm the Assistant Director of Volunteer Engagement. Thank you for joining our program, Making It Count. This program is part of our theme, Lending a Better Hand, which is focused on volunteer education. Today's program is the second session in the Lending a Better Hand series that will explore the impact of volunteerism and ask us to consider how unintended consequences can stand in the way of making a difference. This faculty conversation aims to explore different perspectives and address multifaceted challenges through a white paper approach. The broad dialogue will allow you to take the talking points, reflect on your own work and intentions, and determine new ways or similar ways to reach out to your community. Joining us today as our host and moderator is Jen Wang, class of 2023. Jen currently works as the UBEN intern for student programs on the Alumni Careers, Mentoring, and Campus Engagement team. Jen is responsible for facilitating alumni engagement and development's relationship with student groups and cultivating student marketing and outreach procedures for programs and tools offered. Welcome to the Forever Learning Institute, Jen.
Thank you, Zach. Excited to be here. And I'm excited to introduce to everybody the panelists we have for today. Joining me today in the conversation are Duke scholars Sean Convoy, Associate Clinical Professor in the School of Nursing, Jen Holton, Associate Professor of the Practice of Pastoral Theology and Care from the Divinity School, and also Kay Jowers, Director of Just Environment, Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability, and the Kenan Institute of Ethics. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Let's get started. First, I would love for everybody on our panel to tell us a little bit about your work. This could be at Duke, in the classroom, beyond Duke, anything that's of significance to you. So we know a little bit more about what you do.
Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be here with you. I teach in the Divinity School and teach at the intersection of theology, psychology, and culture. Also ordained clergy in the United Methodist Church. My research is in areas of in conflict zones in Sudan, South Sudan, and Congo, looking at ways that faith can serve as a resource of resilience. But I've also worked in nonprofit areas, refugee resettlement here in the U.S. and with in transitional living facilities with women.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sean Convoy. I serve as an associate professor here at Duke University School of Nursing. I teach in both their graduate and doctoral programs. I'm also a retired naval officer. My work here at Duke finds me directing our psychiatric nurse practitioner program, in addition to leading a couple of different HRSA grants supporting workforce development and mental illness prevention. My current research interests center around the use of high-fidelity simulation, supporting competency-based learning and mental illness prevention.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kay Jowers, and I direct a program called Just Environment, which is a partnership between two research institutes here at Duke, the Kenan Institute for Ethics and the Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. And since what undergirds all of environmental justice is both the environmental aspects and also ethical, moral, and justice aspects, the two institutes thought it was really important that we have this joint program. We invest in deep partnerships with communities to bring teams of trained senior research staff here at Duke and faculty members and mixed groups of students from all levels, undergraduate, master's students, PhDs, to work as co-researchers alongside communities that are experiencing environmental injustices. I've been at Duke for about 10 years doing this work, but my program formally launched 2 years ago. Outside of work, I enjoy serving on boards of small organizations. I'm not currently serving on a board, but really enjoyed serving on the board of a group called Schoolhouse of Wonder here in Durham for a long time when they were in their capacity building stage. And lately, my volunteer work and service outside of the university has been working for my local board of elections on election days and during primaries. And it's been a really interesting experience, particularly in this day and age. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. And definitely happy to see like so many people working on different important issues across campus. And when it comes to work in terms of important and complicated issues, a question that we always want to ask is, when do you know you've made an impact through your work?
I think one of the challenges is you don't always know, right? And just as human beings, we that immediate sort of gratification of seeing an impact is one of the things that brings us back again and again. So I think one of the things about volunteering is that a challenge is that we need to maybe think about the ways we don't always see it, but that I'm always convinced that there is one. I will say this though, that one of the ways I see an impact with people who are volunteering, and this includes myself, is that when people start to question their assumptions about the context in which they are offering their service, or realizing when their assumptions about anything related to, especially cross-culturally, interracially, that those assumptions are misaligned. Often that requires some relationships, direct person-to-person contact. But those are the things that, I think about.
Yeah, I'll just jump into and say I agree. Sometimes you don't know. I have been doing work in the environmental justice, social justice area for 20 years. And I think in one deep collaboration, I actually saw materially improved conditions in the community that we were working in. But those are on such a long time scale to see that kind of impact that I tend to look for smaller indications that things are either going well or no impact isn't always necessarily positive. It might be neutral. Your impact might have some unintended consequences, as was mentioned earlier. So I tend to pay a lot of attention in early relationships to the different aspects of trust. Am I seeing that? Am I acting in trustworthy ways? And am I seeing that the groups or people that I'm serving and volunteering with seem like they're trusting that I am competent at what I say I can do as my area of expertise in the university? Do they trust that I have their interests at heart? So beneficence trust. And, do they is there social trust? Are we developing these deep connections and friendships? And that takes a long time too. That can take many years. It's not always a quick process, particularly if you're coming from an institution or a social identity and working with people who have been marginalized or don't share your social identity. It can take a long time for that to develop.
It's funny, the question, Jen, that you asked took me back a little bit of time. I thought about my time in the military. I recall a conversation that I had with a really trusted leader as I was transitioning out of one military role and into another. And during that transition, she'd asked me if my replacement will do a better job than I did. And I think reflecting on that conversation now, more than 30 years later, my answer was likely a bit more self-serving than it should have been. So consequently, my answer resulted in a military-grade verbal beatdown from my senior chief. Peppered with a remarkable string of expletives and threats, she reinforced that our mission was not about me and that I was role-bound, required to prepare everyone on my team to do better than me in my absence. So as you can imagine, that experience left kind of an indelible mark on me. From that point forward, I embraced the idea that my impact should be measured not by what I personally achieved, but maybe my impact should be measured by how many people I set up for success. And therein and I guess more directly to your question, I know that I will have made an impact with a system or a process that I'm responsible for if it sustains long after I'm gone.
Thank you. Those are really thoughtful answers. Thank you guys so much. And I love that, Kay, you brought up this idea that sometimes our impact cannot be predicted. It might be different from what we had planned. So I wonder, have you ever had an experience where the way you impacted the community was different from what you had planned? And have you ever had to adjust your approach or mindset? Feel free to chime in with a specific example, whatever is more comfortable for you. And Kay, do you want to just get us started on that question?
Certainly. Well, I'm thinking of an example where, it wasn't necessarily that the experience was different from what we expected, but it was that 3 other researchers, faculty members at area universities, and I came together and decided that we wanted to do something different than the traditional university research model. And we didn't know what that looked like, but we knew it didn't look like what we usually saw around the university, that it looked like probably finding a partner that had some sort of asset that we could offer expertise to help catalyze. Maybe they needed some additional capacity, but already had a network and an organization to address. And we were very focused on environmental justice. The partner that we found was very much focused on systems and structural inequality in the neighborhood, and they would not identify themselves. They would not describe themselves necessarily as an environmental justice organization. So the four of us were sort of looking at each other and going, well, can we do housing justice and food justice? Wait, that's all environmental justice. So we can do this. And really just meeting that community where they were at, we went in with an idea that we didn't know quite what to expect, but that we would probably be starting out using our immediate areas of expertise. And that wasn't the case. They actually needed help capacity building and organizing as a nonprofit. They needed help setting up a food cooperative to address hunger in the neighborhood. And we've eventually gotten to a lot of the areas of expertise of the four researchers in the 8 years that we've been invested in this community. But I think I didn't expect that it would take 7 to 8 years before we got around to my very specific areas. But it was a wonderful and such a rewarding experience.
And did you have something to add?
I guess I would come at this from a more process perspective than, what the results are. But the unexpected is like, I think in my research and in the places where in my nonprofit and in when I volunteered, I have come to appreciate being able to tolerate the unexpected. And I'll just give one example about time. So when I'm working with communities that, whether here or in other cultures, well, first of all, in other cultures, there's a very different sense of time. So for me to show up and want to, and to have an agenda that seems productive and important, I usually have a sense of time and how to schedule and how that's going to go. And what I've learned is it's never, ever going to go that way because I need to take into account the community in which I'm stepping into. But I also have realized that the more privilege we have, the better able we are to control our time. And so if I'm working with, say, families that need to go to social services for getting benefits, so that's two different ways that time is going to become distorted, right? Because there's a lot of challenge to getting from one place to another. Let's say for someone that doesn't have a car, and social services itself has its own flow of time. Just need to be prepared to check my assumptions and to reflect on. Learn from those times when the unexpected happens. It's not a failure, right? It's an opportunity to learn.
Thank you.
I guess in light of us being relatively close to Veterans Day, my mind is taking me back to a couple other examples. I spent some time in Northern Iraq in 2008 providing psychiatric care to an Army combat unit. And upon arrival to theater, I did my research, I organized my workflow, and I established a relationship with every command in the area. Once the workflow was in place, I executed a plan. I got out to every command preventatively every week. Each morning, I would get up and I'd go to a tactical operations center to learn what had taken place in the area over the previous 24 hours, because commonly that gave me a heads up as to what I might see in clinic that day. And one day I learned of a very well-coordinated attack on a convoy in transit between Baghdad and Mosul. And during that attack, 24 people were killed and many were seriously injured. And the seriously injured were directed back to Baghdad, and the deceased were brought up to Mosul, where I was at. I remember reflecting on the tragic loss of life, but gave myself permission to kind of shift my focus to the living. And I didn't think about that meeting at the Tactical Operations Center again for 2 weeks. It was about that at that time that I received a visit from a chaplain, and he came into my doorstep and was reluctant to make eye contact with me. And he asked if he could speak with me. I invited him in. I offered him a bottle of water and just listened. And reluctantly, he asked me what I knew about the local mortuary affairs team. And my heart sunk, right? My mind was racing, trying to think about, did I see that command upon my arrival? In my mind, I then reflected on the reality that this command had literally supported hundreds of dead during an 18-month tour in Iraq. And for all of my earnest effort to support the Army's mission, I had somehow missed one of the most vulnerable units in the area. Ironically, their space was no more than a half a mile away from my housing unit. Now, I did my best to compensate for the oversight once they were on my radar, but to be true, a great many soldiers were impacted by my oversight. So before I was aware of this mortuary affairs team, I thought my impact on that community was as it should be. But in reality, my oversight contributed to a delay in care for a really vulnerable community. So I personally struggled for some time with guilt associated with that oversight. However, it was through a really valuable conversation with a chaplain that I received some advice. And he shared with me that we can't always make the right decision, but we can make a decision and then make it right. So sometimes our self-focused pursuit of impact can actually serve as a distraction from the more meaningful forms of impact defined by serving others.
Thank you guys so much. And with that, we're going to go into our first round of Q&A. So if anybody has any questions you want to ask, feel free to pop in the chat. And we actually already have one in from Mark. Mark is asking, should we look for ventures that yield quick results when seeking to volunteer and influence change? Does anybody have answer to that?
My impulse is to say that fast results is great. I mean, if it's it's a way to help a situation, that's wonderful. But I'm not sure that should always be. And if that's a great way to start in terms of volunteerism, I do think that eventually moving toward one in which there can be a longer term commitment and a willingness to engage with people. And I think that yields a different kind of result, a broader impact.
I agree. I tend to think that being able to consistently show up over time is incredibly important in volunteering. However, I will say that, I am by training a sociologist, but also a lawyer, and I don't practice law anymore, but I didn't give up my license when I came into the scholarly world. So I see sometimes targeted opportunities as an attorney to go in and offer pro bono help, for example, after a natural disaster, when people need help filing for FEMA dollars after a hurricane or a forest fire. I see opportunities to go in targeted ways when there is, I have volunteered to go down to now Fort Liberty here in North Carolina to do wills for soldiers and other programs for first responders and help them get their materials together. So if you have a set of professional skills and you can, sign up for something like your bar association or legal aid in your area that can give you those targeted opportunities, you can make a real difference in the lives of people going through hard times, or, if there is some other event that you can help with. That those are hard to predict though. So it's really just being ready when it comes up and willing to accommodate it in your schedule and find it important enough to make it happen, because we definitely don't know when the disasters are going to occur, but they certainly need help. So that's what I'd say.
Something I also offer is the idea that I think in such a kinetic world, we sometimes struggle with our own self-discernment, right? The question is, am I able to provide additional support beyond myself to this individual today? That when we are so focused on serving others, we sometimes recognize that we can't pour from an empty cup. So I think reflexively, the first thing I would challenge people to do is ask the question, am I able to do this today? And if you're not, give yourself grace. This is more of a marathon than it would otherwise be a sprint.
Thank you guys so much. And another thing somebody has asked is, when one volunteers in the community, can you tell us more about how you went about creating consensus and assessing how the power base is constructed?
I can speak to that real quick. I think there's two things. One is when you're coming into a situation like that, I would challenge you not to think about achieving an outcome I would encourage you to principally focus on developing relationships. This is all about relationships. And as it relates to, looking across the environment, you get some experience in this area. There's a process referred to as environmental scanning, where you're constantly scanning the environment to identify what's changed, right? So once you develop that aperture, be able to do environmental scanning, and you really focus on fostering relationships, I think everything else organically follows from there.
Yeah, and I would just add that sometimes when I do want to ensure that the relationships I'm building are across that environment and fully representative of the different perspectives in the community, I will, look to, if I'm engaging with an organization or the people who work within an organization, I'll look at who their leadership is. Are they formally organized such that I can see that they have a board? Who's on their board? Do the board members seem like they're people who live in that? Because I'm generally working with communities and neighborhoods, I can, assess somewhat whether those board members seem to live in that community and are of that community, and therefore, possibly represent the community well. You don't necessarily have to be from a community to represent it well, but that's where I start, is who's leading it, and how big is their base, and what was just said about relationship building. Yeah, go into the potlucks and the community events and being willing to show up when those happen, because those kinds of relationship building opportunities are often not in the 9 to 5 Monday through Friday timeframe.
I so agree. And if I would add, I liked what you, the point you made about, is there someone in the that organization that's connected to the community in which they're serving? And I would just add, what is the philosophy of how they're serving that community? Is it sort of coming in and from the outside saying, we know better than what you need, or are you engaged? Or are they engaging with the community and have participation with the community in terms of trying to discern what the needs are?
Thank you guys so much. And I saw another question in the chat asking, how do you deal with the pain if you're emotionally sensitive? How can you yourself set boundaries in your work?
What a fantastic question. I think, part of this is almost a learned experience that you learn over time to put your nerve endings on the inside of your skin as opposed to the outside of your skin. But one of the realizations that I have encountered over the years of serving is that my distress, my pain, doesn't necessarily advance the cause of the people I'm supporting. So in those situations and circumstances where I am emotionally overwhelmed, I do my very best to compartmentalize in the moment to support the person or persons that I'm trying to provide support to, and then I carve out time with trusted resources after the fact to decompress. And I typically seek out people who have a similar set of experiences that I can kind of reach from. So for me, it's really about, again, self-discernment. Am I able to do this today? If not, give myself grace, but recognizing that me adding my energy to that dynamic does not necessarily help that environment or those people.
Yeah, I so agree. And I would add to this, as I talk to my students about this all the time, that a sense. So first of all, is recognizing that one has a sensitive spirit, and that is a personal challenge. That's really important. But it's also sometimes there is a sense that the more I feel for someone, the more empathy I'm showing. So I talk to students, do you cry with people when they're crying? And that's certainly sometimes a very human response. But the idea of empathy being, feeling something with someone, but not being overcome by it, right? The more we are emotional with someone isn't necessarily a greater signal of what empathy is. And, their life is not our life. Their pain is not our pain. And that doesn't take away at all from being compassionate and caring and empathetic. But by all means, remove oneself, or when there's the opportunity, reflect. And if you have someone to process with, please do so.
Yeah, I think that's all wonderful advice. The thing that I see in the communities I work with, and I have a couple of communities that are largely led by a group of Black women who have taught me about how important it is, even when you're dealing with hard things, to do joyful things together as well. To when you feel the pain, you then know how to identify the opposite of it. And so it could be things as simple as good food and breaking bread together and just spending time in relationship outside of the communities. I mean, to be honest, I have a weekly Saturday morning group of women that I get together with, and we have lunch. We have a book group nominally in the beginning, but mostly it's a conversation about what happened in everybody's week. Does anybody need support? What's going on? And having community to share that with and not be alone in it is incredibly important. But also not putting it on the community that you're working in.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It's always about the balance of being able to be there to support other people, but also making sure that you yourself are supported in the process. And some people in the chat also seems to resonate with that. Thank you guys so much for the advice and the wisdom. We're moving on to our second round of questions that we have prepared, but we'll come back to some more Q&A by the end. So if your question isn't answered now, hopefully we'll come back to it later. So we were talking a lot about unexpected consequences of your efforts, or unintended outcomes, but also, has there ever been a time where you were making a positive impact on a community without even intending, planning, or realizing yourself?
I like the way the question is phrased because it doesn't necessarily say that what kind of impact it is, right? So I see one's relative impact on an individual or community much like the inner workings of an atom. Right? In an atom, protons and neutrons are huddled together and there's electrons spinning around them. And the dynamic interaction of all these subatomic particles, it defines the substance. In that regard, everything that happens inside the atom dynamically shapes its structure and its function. So I don't think we fully appreciate how the potential impact we individually and collectively have on the world. It's kind of like that atom, right? Much like subatomic activity that takes place there, everything we do kind of matters. And if that's true, the inverse is also true, that everything we don't do matters. So I suspect I probably am constantly leveraging an impact, whether it's positive or negative, I'm not sure, but I hope the net effect, excuse the pun, is positively charged.
Thank you for that. I agree. We are always making an impact, but we don't always know what it is, right? And I'm going to go back to that idea of especially the interrelational impact. We never know when that act of respect or kindness or sympathy, accompaniment was what that human being needed. And I am talking about context in which we are working with people, and you just never know. But I'm also going to add to this that when we talk about impact, it's not just the impact on others or an environment. Sharing of one's time, resources, putting care and kindness into the world changes us. It shapes us and how we see the world and how we see ourselves, and sometimes how we challenge ourselves. And so I don't want to underestimate that. Certainly, caring, volunteerism is about what we can do in the world. But the more we change sometimes and recognize the need for caring for our environment, for our brothers and sisters, that compels us to act differently in the world every day, whether we're volunteering or not.
I don't know that I have much substantively to add. So what's already been offered. So I would just offer to those of you who have skill sets that you might be offering in service to community that are possibly unpleasantly received. So I said earlier, I'm a lawyer. Most people don't like to need lawyers, but we're handy in a pinch. And sometimes I have to deliver bad news if they've asked me for legal advice. Or I have to say, I'm sorry, that's not possible? Or have you gotten your minutes book in order if it's a nonprofit and we're doing capacity building work? I saw a question about what capacity building might look like. Sometimes that looks like helping them comply with organizational requirements that the tax code requires if they're going to organize as a 501c3, helping them organize as a 501c3. And you are not the popular person in the room when you're like, did you fill out your tax forms this year? You don't want to get audited. And I think the times that I have felt like I was the annoying pest when I came in the room, that nobody wanted to see me coming as a lawyer. But then would show up at a potluck a couple weeks later and be introduced by a community member as, someone who was really helping them get their affairs in order so that they could have great impact in the community. And I remember feeling, personally like, okay, it's worth it to go every day and know that they may not be happy to see me, but I'm still helping and making a difference.
Thank you, guys. And as many of you might have interactions with students in a classroom setting as well, I wonder how you've been discussing impactful work with the students. When students want to explore a particular issue they're passionate about and want to make an impact in that space, how do you go about discussing that possibility, or how do you mentor those students? What do you tell them?
I can speak to this. I think a big part of my professional role in teaching finds me responsible for shepherding registered nurses through a process of becoming a nurse practitioner, independently responsible for the mental health care of others. So in that role, I have read reams of research and many books on the subject of impacting student performance. And through all of that time, I've come to one singular conclusion, that much of my time has been a waste. And here's the reason why. I say it's a waste because all I really need to know in relation to this topic, I kind of learned from Dr. Maya Angelou. She's got this really famous quote that says, I've learned that people will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So my strategy for impacting students in the classroom is first to earn their trust, and then marry up strategies for learning alongside a series of memorable events intent to hit them in the feels. Right? We can hit them in the feels, we can marry that stuff up, and we can long-term potentiate the stuff they need to know to navigate these programs. So for me, it's about marrying facts with feelings.
Often I'm approached by students because my program builds direct partnerships in community. I'm often contacted by the students who are so eager to get into community and off of campus and make a difference, particularly first years who are wanting to become a part of Durham's community here around the university. And I agree, trust and getting to know them and understanding the kind of impact that they want to make is important. I also tend to caution them to think about how they go about approaching community or service, given that we live in a university town and in an area that has many universities, and that sometimes communities start to feel surveilled or like labs of universities and students, and that it is because they are students and by definition learning things, sometimes they may require supervision. So just offering of their time and their services to an organization might create a supervisory burden on that organization. And so I often caution them to think carefully about how they want to offer their time and energy in the community, to do it thoughtfully, to do it in ways that, we're ensuring that we're not overburdening our community partners around the university. So, and so I have a lot of conversations with them about that, and know I'm having an impact when they come back to me the next year and say, hey, I'm planning my summer program for the Heart Leadership Program or Summer Service of Learning, and I need their help identifying an organization that I won't be burdening, that I'll actually be helping and offering something that they need. So that's how our conversations often go. It's lovely to see them come back.
I'm teaching a course now on forced care and the context of forced displacement, and I'm teaching students who are many of whom are going to be pastors or leading NGOs or other nonprofits. And one of the two questions that I really drive home throughout, and the first is, what are my assumptions? It's what are my assumptions about why I'm doing what I'm doing, who I'm doing it for, what people need across the board. And the second is, how could I be wrong? Because I think, especially when we're in the academic setting, we're learning lots of great things and thinking widely and theoretically, and it's all great. And it's really too easy, I think, then to walk into the messiness and the complexity of real life situations, right? And this is true for me in my research too. It's like that's the first question I have to ask, so that I can be authentic and sort of more aware of myself, and maybe ask questions that help me learn more about the context I'm stepping into.
Thank you, guys. And now we can go into our second round of Q&As. There were two questions from the previous round that we didn't get to, and they're both on particularly working in the NGO space. So I'm going to read these two questions, and they're very, very specific. So if you guys feel like it's going to take a long time to answer, feel free to pick one that speaks to you more. So we can cover other questions as well. So the first one is, what is capacity building in the context of NGO work? And another person asks, how do we ensure the funder or donor priorities don't overwhelm or derail community imperatives, given the limited funds in the NPO space? Jen, you mentioned that you had a lot of students that might be working in nonprofits later. Do you have any experience in this in this area?
Well, I was going to ask you to repeat the second question for me, if you would, please.
Yes. How do we ensure that funder and donor priorities don't overwhelm or derail community imperatives given limited funds in the nonprofit space?
That is a tough one, right? The priorities of the people who actually sustain the organization, right, often have certain ideas about what needs to be done that may be completely contrary to what the needs are in a space. And I'm not sure I have a quick answer for that. For me, always the imperative is community first. But there's this just really speaks to the messiness of this kind of work, right? And why leadership in an NGO is, and I hate to say it this way, and people I know who are leading them don't like being in this position, really, because they're driven by this commitment to being in the community. But it requires a negotiating, right? A kind of, I want to say political, but the ability to manage expectations over and against the reality. This isn't an answer. It's just I'm naming the difficulty and the complexity of it. It's real, and I don't think there is I haven't found a quick answer to how to fix that, except to help educate donors about, and maybe through on the ground kinds of engagement as to what needs are in certain contexts. That would be where I would go.
My answer is a lot more simple, and it's because this is not my area of expertise. But one, I would say it goes back thematically to what we've already talked about, which is one, having developed enough relationships with these stakeholders to be able to have these really difficult conversations, and then again engaging in a series of environmental scanning over the environment, because more often than not, we don't learn about these problems until it's much further down the road. So if we have a pattern of a trusted set of relationships and we engage in serial environmental scanning, we sometimes can get access to those challenges a little bit earlier.
Yeah, and I would probably tie the two questions together, actually. So capacity building, as I think about it, is strengthening the existing resources in, if you're working with an organization or a community, helping in ways that they may need some sort of structure to how they go about achieving their goals. Maybe they need to find funding to pay their staff, because they're an all volunteer staff, and you're really working on that capacity building of the enterprise, their social enterprise. And sometimes the way that I try to ensure that donor priorities don't overtake the community collaborations that I work in is I keep a list of the things the projects that I know need funding in the community, and I have 3 deep collaborations. So I've got 3 parking lots of things that I know they could use. And when I see funding opportunities for something specific like that, I will, immediately try and make that connection for them and help with the fundraising. So some of it is also keeping an eye out for those opportunities that they could leverage and offering that capacity to them, that you will keep an eye overall on what's coming in terms of project funding. And I agree with Jan, talking to funders. One of the things my community partners actually ask is, would you please go back to the university and talk to your colleagues who work in fundraising and have them talk to the foundations? Can you get me in front of a foundation to talk about how philanthropy's goals are mismatching with community's goals? So, trying to amplify their voices towards to philanthropy is really important too.
Thank you, guys. And there is one more question. In your efforts to volunteer and help community, what is your advice if you sense that others are trying to sabotage your efforts or just simply going the other direction?
I think it's sometimes a really tenuous place when you say, if it's your sense, it doesn't necessarily mean you have material evidence to support it. So before you react, I think you need to question the premise and clarify expectations and what is taking place. Sometimes our own insecurities and role can sometimes be projected onto the people that we work with, making it feel like we're being sabotaged, but it's not necessarily the case. So personally, I would question the premise, have a really meaningful conversation with the individual to clarify expectations before I would move forward.
And I would say having deep relationships. I always know who the core people who are, my North Star in my collaborations are, so that I can go to them and say, I get the sense that something's going on with this organization or this person that seems counter to what the goals of the collaboration seem to be. Could you explain? Or, I might not even say that. I might not even state my observation. I would just ask questions or, ask for direction, because I don't want to define the strategies, the problems. I want to be an expert offering skill sets and expertise that they need when they need it. So knowing who your North Star is, your core board to ask those things is really important.
Knowing who to go to and talk to, but also especially if you're, this is on if you're doing something new. So this is on maybe an individual level, and it's new and it's awkward and it's kind of messy, and we're not sure we're doing, of how we're doing in this particular task. It does make us much more vulnerable to feeling like, adversely toward others that may be, working around us. So never hurts to clear.
Yeah, thank you. And as our final question, I really want us to wrap up all that we've talked about today. So if there's one key takeaway every one of you wish for the audience to get out of our conversation so far, what would that be? Or is there an idea that you want to encourage everybody to ponder further afterward? Jan, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Well, you've already sort of gotten a sense from me, I think, that the interpersonal piece of this, I think, is just tremendous. And it's of stepping into the world and making a difference. And wherever that is and whatever the context is, it not only changes where we are and has the potential to impact so many people, but it does continue to form and reform who we find ourselves to be in the world and how we see the world. Because every time, again, we're going to go back to those assumptions. One of our assumptions is proven wrong, then we go the next time into the world, just with a different lens, seeing what's in front of us. I will add one thing. And there's this term that I use often that I want to encourage people to think about, because sometimes you're stepping into, again, in an individual volunteer capacity, sometimes going into places that are unfamiliar feels kind of scary. And it's easy to confuse fear that's intended to keep us safe, that we should absolutely listen to, and that's like this instinctively we're in danger. But it also sometimes feels in a similar way when we are feeling compelled to step out of our comfort zone and to do something different. And it's taking time and practice to discerning those two, and when it is that we can practice sort of a willing vulnerability is what how I call it. It's a practice, and it takes a community of others sometimes to help sound that out. But it's so essential to being able to move into the world in different spaces and give of ourselves and help reshape. And I just have to say, across the board, our world has just never needed it more now, at least in my lifetime.
Hey, do you want to go next?
Sure, though I was hoping to hear what Sean said, so I can't quite pick my takeaway, and I thought maybe I already agree with Jan. So, but let me see. I hope people will. It's got to be a combo. I'm sorry. Slow down and recognize the importance of being trustworthy in multiple ways when you go into a community. Everyone has this sense of urgency. The issues that I work on, they've always been urgent. They've been urgent since the country started, and will remain urgent. I can't rush relationship building, and it is important to be trustworthy, which also means I'm going to mess up, but owning up to it and holding myself accountable and saying that to my partner. So slow down, be trustworthy.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you went first, Kate, because that marries up nicely with what I'm thinking. So two things. One is that, think about every question today during this panel, was focused around this concept of impact. That would imply the people who are interested in doing this are intrinsically motivated. That also implies there's a lot of pressure we place on ourselves to leverage said impact. So one thing I would encourage people to remember is that no one situation or circumstance ultimately defines your success or your failure. So give yourself a little bit grace as you navigate this process of trying to find a way to leverage an impact in a really vulnerable world. I also would say that I thought a little bit before this morning as I was walking my dog in preparation for this about this idea of impact. And part of me thinks that maybe the focus shouldn't be so much on impact. Maybe it's about really grounding yourself in relationships. And when you ground yourself in relationships, the impact will just kind of organically follow.
That's beautiful. Thank you guys so much. And thank you for a great session in general, and to our audience for joining us.